So I watched the Dave Chappelle special, so you should too. Y'all thought I was gonna say, so you don't have to, right? So what's up? Welcome back to the channel today, everybody. Just as I said before, I took some time today and I watched the Dave Chappelle new stand-up called The Closer. And I have to be honest, so I am actually a big Dave Chappelle fan. I cracked up at Sticks and Stones and the Bird Revelation series. And I really enjoy and thought it was really awesome when he was talking about trans people. I like to laugh, and it's kind of hilarious, as he said, So when I got the notification to watch The Closer, I was super excited. And just off the bat, it really didn't disappoint. So definitely go watch it and actually listen to what Dave says. But I'm going to break down some of the points that he talks about. So what's really always been interesting about Dave Chappelle is he does actually go after everybody. And I kind of listed it as I was listening, just kind of listening and watching what groups he was going after. I mean, he went after Christians, he went after Jewish people, Black people, white people, LGBT, specifically trans, and then gay men, especially Black gay men. He went after Mike Pence. He went after women. He went after feminists, and he went after veterans. I mean, he very much went after just about every group you could think of in this episode. Of course, he targeted and went back to some of his LGBT jokes, some trans jokes, which he also claimed that this was the last special for a while, and that this would be the last time he goes after and talks about LGBT issues. Now, so some of the stuff he goes and says, like one thing he talks about is how he's actually jealous of the gay community, right? Because of how well the movement is actually going. Because in such a short amount of time, the LGBT movement has been able to, gain notoriety and get almost everything that they ever wanted done when, the Black community has been fighting for some of these things. And now, these racial issues are starting to come back up and everything like that. So that was one area where he kind of touched on, talking about the gay community. At one moment, he told a lesbian story, a story about a lesbian, and it was actually pretty funny. I don't want to give away too much of this because part of comedy is shock value. He said at one point, "I'm hated by the gays and lesbians, but these transgender want me dead." And that's true. If you see some of the reactions, it's absolutely true. And then he kind of went in a little bit more and talked more in depth about trans issues. He stated how he liked and had genital preferences for biological women. But he also, right after that, he stated, "This doesn't mean another point of view can't exist when it comes to genital preferences," kind of alluding to the fact that if you want to date a trans woman, she still got her penis, then it's no issue, but that's not for him. And it's kind of what we've been talking about for a while, right? Like, general preferences are cool. It doesn't really matter what you like. You like what you like. Go for it. Also, some of the stuff's kind of interesting. He didn't really dive too much in depth on some of this stuff, but it's really interesting. So there was a couple trans jokes that he made, which I find it was really interesting because during this episode, I mean, from the very first initial part of this episode, there was two people that were in almost the front of the audience that really stuck out. And I don't know what they were there for because they seemed really gung ho for it. Were they there for the optics to make it seem like he was pissing people off? were they there to heckle Dave? Did they really like his stuff? Um, but I will tell you that the camera actually kind of showed them in some of these trans clips and some of the jokes that, like, right after he told some of these jokes, and yeah, they were definitely not impressed. I mean, but this is what they look like. So they kind of look like the stereotypical, non-binary, they them type people, which really wouldn't be the people that you would think would be at a Dave Chappelle show laughing at these jokes anyways. But maybe they just like Dave. I don't know. Maybe they just weren't impressed and didn't think that those jokes were funny. I thought they were hilarious. So it's really interesting. Then he goes on to kind of talk about his friend Daphne, who she was a comedian. And he actually put her on stage. She opened for him in San Francisco one time. She was a trans woman that they met after the show. She was going to all his shows. So he's talked about her in other specials, and everything like that. He talked about just how amazing she was, how she could poke fun at herself, how she could spin things, and just how she was a funny person, even though, like, the first night she bombed on stage for 45 minutes and still had a great sense of humor about it. Unfortunately, I mean, it made headlines last year that Daphne had committed suicide, not long after Dave's show came out, and she defended the attacks that people were making on her. It's really indicative of where we are as society, because she stood up for Dave, and then she had committed suicide not too long after that, because after she stood up for Dave, she actually received a lot of hate from the leftist. And as he says, I mean, they don't actually know why she would have committed suicide, but definitely being canceled and being attacked by the left couldn't have helped with somebody's mental state in that way. So maybe it is time the leftists kind of take their own advice and worry about people other than themselves, and worry about people as people, and not just for these characters of who they are, because the left doesn't, I mean, these people don't really care about trans people if they disagree with you. So it was there was definitely a sad point when he talked about her. So finally, he kind of discusses how the new gays are too sensitive, and I'll agree with this. This is kind of what we've talked about a lot on this channel, where a lot of the trans movement, and the TQ plus movements have become just so sensitive that we can't take any criticism. It's kind of ridiculous. So Eric Degens wrote on NPR, for Dave Chappelle, punchlines are dares. His new special, The Closer, goes too far. So in this article, he goes on to just talk a lot about, the issues, because, that Dave Chappelle brings up, not realizing that this is a comedy set. So some of the issues there, you can't put context into comedy, and you write these jokes to make light of certain situations, and maybe get people to think, maybe get people to actually go do research and see what happened on some of these issues. But they really do just get people to think. And comedy is also a lot of times based loosely on reality. I don't look to comedians to be, factually accurate all the time. I just don't. And then, predictably, leftist Twitter just blew up, right? So many people, um, like Alyssa McKenzie, just to let you know, I have zero space for this loser anywhere on my timeline, in my home, or anywhere else. Dave Chappelle is a transphobic POS, always has been, always will be. So this person actually touches on kind of what I talked about earlier about him going kind of after everybody, right? So they write, Chappelle touches topics nobody else would dare. He's a genius. Those topics, being transphobic, being homophobic, being anti-Semitic, being misogynistic, there's nothing brilliant about being bigoted. But see, here's the thing. I don't think that's what Dave is doing. It's comedy, right? Like, people always say a lot of times, like, Blazing Saddles would never be able to be made today because of the content of it. And I believe that to be true. Like, nobody could ever make content like that. And it's interesting because somebody like Eric Degens and other stuff, they kind of regurgitate these things making it seem like he's punching down on people, right? Which is absolutely, I mean, how insulting is it to say that it's punching down to make fun of trans people when you make fun of everybody else? Like, we are such fragile beings that we can't take some jokes when people have them. In fact, in my experience, like, most trans people, like, in the real world, not online, it's quite the opposite. Like, we have pretty thick skin and we can usually joke about, the issues that we're going through. In fact, it's funny because I joked with my roommate, like, me and her are going to get kicked off the internet because we're doing TikToks, which I'll be putting on like my Instagram channel and everything like that, about what, the hilarious stuff that happens living with a transitioning trans woman, right? Because there is a lot, and maybe it's because I'm former military and I just kind of have that type of sense of humor. I can joke with myself. I can joke about myself. I am nervous to do this because I don't want my roommate to get the heat that I get, but it's hilarious stuff, and it's definitely not politically correct, but it's funny, it's comedy, and it's poking fun at the things that we all know to be true. It's not misogynistic and everything like that. So these people that have like zero sense of humor, I often wonder, like, what do they find funny? Where do they find joy in life? If they can't even laugh at themselves. And I think that is actually part of the big issue when it comes to the trans movement, is we can't laugh at ourselves. Like, Dave Chappelle, in my opinion, is hilarious, and not everybody likes him. I get that, but again, comedy is supposed to be raw and out there, and we should be able to make fun of ourselves. In my opinion, when you kind of make fun of people like this, and especially in the way that Dave does it, it's more flattering than anything. If you watch my interview with Chrissy Mayer, like, we talked about it, how can you be a leftist and be a comedian? Because free speech is under attack. So if you do not toe this politically correct line, which comedy generally crosses political correction, and that's why it's funny. There's shock value and everything in comedy. So if you can't laugh at the stuff that should shock you, if you take it so literally that you think that people are just, they hate you and everything like that, and that's why they talk about you, then I really don't know what you find funny. I mean, Stephen Colbert dancing with vaccines is not funny. Like, that's not funny at all. That's propaganda. But again, that kind of makes sense because, like, in the Marxist utopia, there is no need for the arts, specifically, right? Because arts do not provide don't provide products for the general well-being of the population. And so maybe this is just them trying to get rid of the arts. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Click that subscribe button below. Make sure you go follow me on Instagram and Twitter. I'm over there a whole lot more, and I will see you guys next time.